Ohio State has that as its fifth quarterback to its 2024 quarterback room, and Julian Sayin, five-star quarterback, the number one quarterback in the 2024 recruiting class, originally committed and signed and early enrolled at Alabama, but then decided after Nick Saban's retirement that he would hit the transfer portal, and the options reportedly came down to USC and Ohio State, with Ohio State eventually winning out in that battle. I'm Stephen Means, that's Nathan Baird, and that's Andrew Gillis. Andrew, we'll start with you. Just when you look at this five-star talent, what is Ohio State getting and Julian Sayin, and does he remind you of anybody else?
Well, it's a different kind of style from Aaron Nolan. Aaron Nolan's a little bit bigger. He's left-handed, which is probably the first thing that you're going to notice. They both come from kind of talent-rich areas, which I do think is important. Julian Sayin comes from California. Obviously, Aaron Nolan comes from Georgia. But with Sayin, you look at his 247 page, and ironically, the comparison that one of their national recruiting analysts gave him was J.J. McCarthy, which I think Ohio State fans would find pretty interesting. But in kind of the limited stuff that you see of him, he's just a really solid thrower of the football. You can watch him throw and you can see the accuracy there. And I think that matters a lot. I mean, if you can't be accurate as a quarterback, then I don't really care about anything else, because you have to complete the football or else you're not going to play. So I think when you talk about a quarterback that could fit in Ohio State's system, you need a guy who can do that. You need a guy who is kind of developed in that way, who can read the field, who can make all the throws. Aaron Nolan can do that too. I think Julian Sayin probably has a little bit less athleticism than Aaron Nolan, but Aaron Nolan is kind of athletic in the way of he can get around the pocket, not so much he's going to run for first downs every time he gets the chance. Aaron Nolan is just kind of a mobile guy. I think Julian Sayin has a little bit less of that. But I do think when you talk about Julian Sayin and kind of what he brings to this offense, he doesn't fit the mold of he's not the 6'4", 6'5" guy. He's only listed at 6'1", so he is a little bit shorter compared to some of the, maybe what people might think of a high level quarterback. He's not kind of that type of player, but he can move a little bit. Good feel for the pocket, I think, and I think accuracy is the number one thing that you see with him. And in an Ohio State offense, if you get the ball to your receivers accurately, you're probably feeling pretty good about where you're at.
Nathan, when I watch Julian Sayin, and especially in comparing him to Aaron Nolan, Julian Sayin's taller than Bryce Young, like significantly taller. Like Bryce Young's not 6 foot tall at all. But I do think their play styles, Julian Sayin is Bryce Young, Aaron Nolan, CJ Stroud. And that's it. One is processor, on time, on target, ball placement, beautiful, just in the pocket, can do it outside of the pocket if you need him to, but that's not necessarily where you go to first. While with Julian Sayin, it is a little bit more improvisation and what you see from him. And when you get him on the move outside of that pocket, he can make some magic happen.
First of all, just to clarify, Nolan is left-handed. Julian Sayin is right-handed. I just wanted to make sure. I knew that's what you were saying. I just don't want people to get confused that both of them were left-handed. It's going to be a lefty-righty face-off there in spring of 2025, we assume. I think improvisation is probably a good word. I think that's where the J.J. McCarthy comparison maybe comes in the most, that it's someone who would be able to freelance a little bit more and make things happen like that. And I know that may be a comparison that makes some Ohio State fans cringe, but not just because it's Michigan, but because some of the things they saw from J.J. McCarthy over the years. But I mean, he still hoisted a national championship trophy this past year. So I think it's what he could do within a Ryan Day system. I think a quarterback of that type, I think it could still work inside of Ryan Day's system. And this becomes the latest in sort of a trend at Ohio State. And because if you look at, Devin Brown was already a quarterback with some wiggle, and Will Howard certainly is the former Kansas State starter they've added as a transfer. Lincoln Keenholt's kind of all about wiggle, although he can throw too. But like you're starting to see, Aaron Nolan starts to become like the odd man out just in terms of maybe playing style, as you were saying, Stephen. And that's an interesting progression. And I don't know how much of it was intentional that they had to go find people like that, or if it was just the best quarterbacks that they thought fit happened to have those talents. It's probably somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the between that, because they obviously saw with CJ Stroud, they could have a tremendously productive. They had the best offense in the country 2 years in a row, most yards per play 2 years in a row, with C.J. Stroud back there just throwing darts, and that'll work out for you. But I think they've also seen that having a real running threat, it could be beneficial. And I'm eager to see what this offense might look like again. Taking like a Justin Fields-ish, and none of these guys are probably running 4.340s or whatever, but a Justin Fields-ish ability to be a running passer with a receiver group that's going to keep churning people out like what Ohio State is doing right now. Like, that's an intriguing combination. It was something that Justin Fields didn't really have in 2019. Did get to taste it more in 2020 in a shortened year. We didn't get to see the full look at it. But now thinking ahead to where you could have a quarterback who's more mobile, the two now starting running backs that they have, and then on top of that, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, Emeka Ibuka, Brandon Ennis. Like, it's the way we've been talking about this defense and how they've just been populating themselves. Well, now you're starting to see that shift back onto the offense. The offense was what really fell short for this team last year, and they think needed long-term repairs in some important ways. I don't know if quarterback was one of them, but I mean, here we are. It's impressive to see them being able to just kind of take whoever they want almost at this point.
You almost have to look at it from a standpoint of, when something goes wrong, what are you going to do about it? With Justin Fields, it was clearly his legs. I think with Devin Brown, it's probably his legs. Lincoln Keenos is probably his legs. Will Howard, that was hard because at Kansas State, he just didn't have the weapons he was going to have here. So maybe he had to do some things more often at Kansas State than what he would ever have to do at Ohio State. But still, you can say it's probably leaning his legs, while Dwayne Haskins, everything was his arm. So Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields are like the extreme of the extreme in both sides. C.J. Stroud, I felt like, was a perfect marriage of both. It's just he didn't do the one. He could do it, as he showed us in the Georgia game and as he's been showing us in the NFL, but he just didn't do it as often in the other 21 games he was Ohio State starting quarterback. And I think that's where Aaron Nolan is like, whether he does it a lot or not, what does he do when things go wrong that makes up for the fact that he won't run as much? What we're saying with Julian Sayin, because I think sometimes when we start saying running, Nathan, to your point, it can come off as we're over saying that, like, oh, he's a super athlete. Julian Sayin is not a super athlete. In fact, he's a decent athlete, but he does just enough to buy time. And which means that sometimes he's going to make this crazy play, that's why the J.J. McCarthy comparison comes up. That's why I use Bryce Young. Those were two guys who could sometimes manipulate a pocket and make a throw where you're like looking at it sideways, and then you work and you go, oh, good job, Bryce. Good job, JJ. That's exactly how we drew it up. And that's where Julian Sayin is in comparison to Aaron Nolan. The other difference right now is Julian Sayin just might be a little bit more ready in a situation where we are talking about, we've said this a couple times, they are 5-star quarterbacks. So sometimes things can happen with 5-star quarterbacks where they take a step and they're maybe ready immediately and you throw them out there, even if it's not at the start of the season. If that were to happen in 2024, if that Trevor Lawrence scenario, Caleb Williams scenario plays out for Ohio State, I'm not expecting it to, but if it does, Julian Sayin was where I would probably put my Buckeye Talk tokens on being the guy that happens with right now. It doesn't mean anything about things going forward in 2025. It's just Julian Sayin just might be a little bit more ready in terms of being ready to play college football than where Aaron Nolan is right now. And I think he showed that off at the Elite 11 last summer. Get the text, 614-350-3315. Ohio State's 5th quarterback in his 2024 room. When that information came out, that's the first place we went with it before we went anywhere else with a 2-week free trial, $3.99. After that, Ohio State spring game is going to be a very interesting one. In fact, when they start spring practices, whenever those dates come out, I promise you that's probably the most thing we're going to be texting is about what all 5 of these quarterbacks are doing during spring practice. So get the text, 614-350-3315 for Nathan Baird and for Andrew Gillis. I'm Stephen Means, and that was Buckeye Talk.